What's going on, everyone? This is Sherry, and you're tuned into the She Said What She Said podcast, where we interview badass women in the sports world and beyond. So this week is a little bit of a somber week for our podcast. You know, we had a fun show planned. B was going to be here. We had one of her Hooper teammates on. We were going to have a great time. But over the weekend, B lost one of her brothers, and obviously she's not going to be here with us. It's really just tragic losing a sibling, losing a loved one unexpectedly. So we scrapped our podcast, and I really wanted to talk about mental health, talk about grief, talk about depression, all those things. It seems like there's a lot of that going on right now, with COVID, with not with COVID. It's like every day in my timeline, someone is mourning the loss of a friend, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt. There's just a lot of grief going on right now. So I personally am not fully qualified on this subject. I did some time as a crisis counselor for the crisis text line. So I do have some training, and I'll be sure as the show goes on to make sure you guys know how to get a hold of them. Because if you are going through a tough time, they are a phenomenal resource. All their crisis counselors are trained to basically help you, talk you off the ledge, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, and help you direct you to those resources that you might need. But honestly, I do not have the training like some of these women have on there tonight. So my first guest, she is a clinical psychologist, Dr. Deidre. Come on in. Hello. And you are on mute. There. Oh, nope.
All right, there I am.
Hi, how are you today?
Hi. Good. Happy to be here. I know sometimes it can be a difficult, topic to discuss, but I'm happy to be here in community. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Can you give everyone a little bit of a background on
Sure.
who you are and your expertise, etc.?
Be happy to. So I'm in my 18th year of working at a college counseling center at the University of Illinois. Currently, I've worked in other higher ed institutions as well as private practice. So I would say a specialty of working with college age students and adults around a myriad of mental health issues. So happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for, and we did a mental health podcast. What was that? Last summer?
Yeah, somewhere around late summer, fall. So
yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
It was right after the Olympics with Simone Biles.
Yes,
and and that was yeah, that's right. We did that one together.
I think we have the Big Ten in common.
Yep, I was like, hold on, yeah,
I'm a Spartan, but I work for Illinois. So, but
yeah, and I got that team back there.
Exactly.
Our next, I should say, guest, our next panelist, she has a phenomenal organization that I will let her speak on. I actually met her on a little bit after New Year's. We had a brunch for our podcast, and her and I got to talking a lot about mental health, PTSD. Probably too much to be talking about when you're at like a fun brunch and having a good time. But I guess sometimes those bottomless mimosas get to me, and I can go off on any tangent, any subject. But let's bring her in, Nicole Johnson. Hello. Hold on, you're on mute as well. I think Terrence put everyone on mute. Hold on, you're still on mute, Nicole.
Oh, I said everything already, but
yeah, say it all again.
I just said I'm laughing and I have mixed emotions. I have had so much recent tragedy. I've lost 3 loved ones in the last 3 months, 2 in the last couple of weeks.
Wow.
And so I didn't know exactly what the show would be about, but certainly this is timely for me. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And can you tell everyone a little bit about your organization?
Okay, the organization is called Where We Meet. It was designed to reduce the stigmas associated with mental health, primarily in the Black and Brown communities. I myself am a veteran. I'm a victim of trauma, and I've had so many experiences, as many of us have, with trauma, some PTSD, some anxiety, a lot of us, the things that are common but not so common to talk about. And so once I realized how common it actually was, I decided that more people in our community should know about it, which is where we meet came from. We primarily do theater for therapy, which is exciting. It's very exciting, but it also assists with some of the tools needed to combat the things that occur when you're in mental health crisis, or tools are created to be proactive so that when you feel like you're heading in that direction, these tools can be utilized. My background is actually in healthcare. I've been in healthcare for 30 years. I'm a healthcare administrator, but this is my heart, and this is where I lean towards. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so our final panelist, our final guest, is actually the reason why I am wearing this shirt today. That's right. It's not very often that I get to rep Alliance. I'd actually texted my dad. I was like, hey, Dad, my guest tonight is the last Detroit Lions quarterback to win a postseason game. And he was like, Erik Kramer? And I said, yeah. It's like, oh, who filled in for Rodney Peete when he got injured? I was like, yeah, that's the one. And so we're not going to talk about his time on the Bears. No, we won't, because maybe a little bit, but primarily
we can claim him too.
Yes, he is a legend. He is the most successful quarterback in postseason history, in Detroit Lions history. Let's bring in Erik Kramer.
All right, let's make sure I'm not muted here.
You're not.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Bueno. Okay, so thank you.
Welcome.
Great introduction, by the way. Glad to be on with all of you. You've obviously got some great backgrounds and are well versed in this. What could be painful, obviously, subject matter, but at the same time, so many people do have to encounter it. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I found is that you don't know my whole story, but also I'll save it for as we get going here. But one of the things that I did find in some of life's tragedies, there's people out there you didn't see coming as a result. And people step into your lives at times that you don't have any idea about. And that's one thing amongst many that I can say that has been, in a way, life-changing, to know that there's also people out there too.
Absolutely. So we'll start it on a lighter note. Erik, if you want to give us a little bit of your backgrounds from football-wise, explain to why the Lions fans called you brass balls, I believe.
Well, they left out that second term, but just assuming that's what I think they meant by it. So,
but yeah, tell us a little bit about your sports history.
All
and
right.
What brought you to my fantastic team, the Lions?
Yeah. Well, okay. Specifically that particular tag, if you will. So we played. This is in 1991, I think, and we played. So I was Rodney's backup, and we played the Colts. This is in the pre-Manning Colt days, and they, it was a fourth down stop, and we had to punt the ball. But on that third down play, Rodney had gotten dinged up a little bit. I can't remember exactly what happened, and so we punt. They muffed the punt, and we recover. And I can't remember what yard line was on, but it might have been like, let's say the 30-yard line going in. And so, of course, I think the first play was like first and second plays was hand off to Barry. Who wouldn't? So
I would.
Well, I'm just saying I would have. So on the next play, I look out, and Willie Green, who was one of our receivers, and he was a rookie in 1990. That was my first year there. And so we had worked quite a bit together on just whatever, before practice, after practice. And we had a little play called a fade stop, a little route that when you got press coverage inside man technique, this is we give this little, tug on the shoulder sleeve, and away we went. So it actually went for a touchdown. And I come off the field, and Jerry Wampler, who was the offensive line coach, has got like his hands on his knees, and he's like shaking his head, like laughing. And he goes, "Let's get this straight. You just took the ball out of Barry's hands on third down." He goes, "You could have been finding your own way home right now." So I got off to the field and sat next to Willie, and I was like, "That was third down?" I had no idea. So the way the nickname came is after the game, when I get on the bus, there was already probably 5-6 linemen sitting in the back of the bus. And I think it was Ken Dallafor. And as I get on, he's like, "Hey, Brass, come on back here." So that kind of stuck for a while.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I love it. And so, you played a couple of years in Detroit. Obviously, who doesn't dream of being a Lions player when they grow up? And then
I'll tell you who doesn't. People in California don't.
What? You didn't dream about having a Detroit winter?
Well, as crazy as that might sound, the only, like, I didn't have gear growing up, and so the only jersey I ever had, and it was probably bought for me by my dad, is a Roman Gabriel back when he played with the Rams, number 18 jersey. So it just so happened that I went to NC State, which is where he went. And so, yeah, I didn't even know there was the Detroit Lions when I was a kid. I'm sorry.
At least we had an indoor stadium, the good old Pontiac Silverdome.
And you've hosted us 2 Super Bowls, one in Pontiac. So, yeah, that's pretty good. And I will say that when I went there, I was the happiest guy on earth.
I mean, you were drafted by a team.
No, I was not drafted by them. Wait. In fact, I wasn't drafted, period.
Wait, you weren't drafted?
No, I was not. So I came out in 1987.
Okay.
And I was an undrafted free agent with the Saints.
Okay.
And so I got cut, which I was going to. And but it was also the same year as the 1987 player strike. So I got a phone call from a few teams, and so I ended up going to the Falcons. And then we played 3 strike games. And then thinking that I was going to be turning in my playbook like everyone else, apparently I didn't. So they kept me for the rest of that season. And then the following year, though, I did get cut and went up to Canada, played a year and a half there, and then didn't want to go back and didn't have a contract to go back. And then I just called around a bunch of teams, and the Lions were like the only team that called me back. That's how I got to the Lions.
Fantastic.
I called my way on.
Hey, no one else was ringing our phone.
It worked out. What can I say? And I was there. Those were 4 great years. So we, it was a young team, and most everyone hung out together. And that was good times, very good times.
And you got to play with one of the greatest football players of all time.
You could almost say Barry got to play with me. You could almost say that. You wouldn't, but you could.
Big facts.
You're right. That dude, he would, like, the best play we had was Barry 1-on-11.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he didn't ever run through any holes, but he could make really good Hall of Fame players look really bad, like instantly bad. And I was watching, they have something, I don't know if you guys know this, but they have like on, I think it's NFL Network. So they'll have like the top 10 top 10 players in this, and top 10 runs of all time. And Barry Sanders, so it's other people talking about these things. And the guy gets on there and he goes, they could make a top 10 run list of Barry's, and it would be the best runs of all time in the NFL. And that's probably true.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you look at someone like, and I promise I won't talk about football for the hour, but look, I don't get the professional
I'm
football players on
enjoying
my
this.
show very much. So I'm like,
Mhm.
especially the Lions, they always make you talk to Bears players. I'm like, ugh. But you look at someone like an Emmitt Smith, who was amazing, right? But he also had one of the best lines probably of all time. And you look at what Barry Sanders did, and it was like you said, it was him against the world. And as my dad will tell you, that was probably the last time that he was really cheering for the Lions, because it's been a struggle to cheer for them ever since. But that's
well, I know you don't want to make this into a Lions podcast, but I'll just say this for you Lions folks out there: they are going to be good in, I'd say, end of next year, beginning of the following season, because they were in damn near every game this year. They invented ways to either be defeated or lose the game themselves. But
who's going to lose on a 66-yard field goal that
was kicked after the play clock went out?
Yeah, no biggie, whatever.
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. Is this roster they've got is pretty good.
Yeah, and I will say, as much as I think Dan Campbell is, EK will be the only ex-Lion on the Chicago Clubhouse podcast. False. Rasheed Davis also played for the Lions briefly. Boom. I will say, Dan Campbell is, as much as I'm like, does he snort Adderall? Like, what is he drink? Is he drinking? Like, does he snort Red Bull? That was what I was thinking. It does seem like the players really like him, and it does seem like they're having a good time when they're out there.
I agree with you. And if you look, I mean, they've done a really nice job. I guess it's Brad Holmes. He's the general manager.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have stockpiled some nice draft picks.
Yeah.
And
we'll get there.
And they don't need a whole bunch, like, to be good.
We need some pieces, but yeah, not a ton. So after your time with the lovely Lions came to the end, Deidre, I'll let you ask about that next team.
Well, by the time, I think I was actually living in Chicago then. It was before I came. So those were some of the glory years. Can you talk a bit about the actual team that you play for in the Chicago Bears and the run you had with us?
Yeah. So I went there in 94. And unfortunately, fortunately, I was a free agent. Unfortunately, the Lions did not offer me a contract.
I'm sorry.
And well, sometimes, they were also the only team that returned my phone call. So, but so in going to Chicago, that was literally the first time anyone ever recruited me, so to speak. So I didn't recruit out of high school, nowhere. And I went to junior college. In fact, Dr. Deidre, I almost went to the University of Illinois.
Okay.
So a friend of mine that played tight end, we took a recruiting trip there together, and he went, but I ended up going to NC State. But to get back to Chicago, the first year I was there, I think it was 3 or 4 games into the season, I got hurt. I forget what, separated shoulder, broken collarbone, or whatever it was. And when I was ready to play again, I wasn't playing again. So Steve Walsh had played well enough. Yeah. And so we ended up going to the playoffs. And that happened to be the season the 49ers went crazy. Well, all year, but then especially in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
In fact, we played them in the playoffs, and it wasn't even close. But the next year in 95 is when I had a fairly good season. And our offensively, we were on point that whole year. And unfortunately, we only went 9-7, and I think the Falcons ended up beating the 49ers on the last game. So had the 49ers just done what they've always done, we'd have been in the playoffs. But we didn't make it. And then so the next year, I ended up hurting my neck 4 or 5 games into the season. So that season was over. And then the next year, they brought in Rick Meyer. And so I ended up playing a lot. And we still did okay offensively. We just didn't win a whole bunch of games. And then 98, I think I got hurt about, I forget. I got hurt early in the season, but ended up kind of lasting there for a little while. And I think it was about the 10th or 11th game of the season was where I ended up getting a couple surgeries on the same day, one for a knee, one for a shoulder.
Wow.
And then I rehabbed all off season, and then the Bears had fired Coach Wanstedt and brought in Dick Duran, and then they actually had Mark Hatley move up from somewhere in personnel to, he was like, I guess, a general manager. And so I was, because I was training in the off season in Arizona, they wanted me to come in for what I thought was want to make sure you're okay for the training camp the day before training camp. And so they had filmed it. And so apparently I wasn't injured. So I came in the next day thinking everything's fine. And that's when I got cut. And so that was kind of an unfortunate end. But I love Chicago. I absolutely.
Well,
I'll make it.
Thank you for saying that, because we loved you. And in the comments, somebody wants to know if we were a rebound from Detroit or if you actually wanted to be there.
Well, I'll just say this. So free agency is kind of like being recruited. So, and when I came there, Coach Wanstedt and Ron Turner had picked, I was married at the time, had picked me and my wife up, and we went to Gibson's and we went to whatever. And so I remember going back to the hotel room literally that night, jumping up and down the bed like, I can't believe what's happening here. So it was very cool to have that experience. Yeah.
Nice. So, I was reading that you had said that you started having signs or experiencing depression during your NFL career.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about would you say it had reared its head maybe in your childhood, teenage years, or was it really NFL when you first started feeling that?
Yes, it was in Chicago, and it was in that year in 1994. And so it was my first year ever getting paid like a starting quarterback and being named one to start the year. Didn't happen in high school, didn't happen in college. Well, NC State, but they also recruited two other guys at the same time. And so it was kind of showing up every day, not knowing what to do. And eventually I got to where, instead of making that right turn, I wish I would have made that left turn and not go to work. And eventually I remember calling my mom and, seeing if she would, I don't know. I guess just in talking to her, she's like, all right, I'm going to be on the next flight out. So she came out and stayed, I'm going to say maybe, 6-7 days. And I think just, growing up, my mom and I were never that close. And, but for her to do that, was kind of cool. And so that got me through a little bit of it, although it didn't go away. But depression's, as you professionals know, that's not something you can fight. That's just, it's here. When it comes, it's here to stay. And so I remember, I quite honestly don't remember how it ended. There was somebody that I had worked with in Detroit, actually, again, named Kevin Wildenhouse, and went to him I went to Dr. Birch, who was a team internist, happened to say, hey, I'm looking for a licensed marriage family therapist. Well, it wasn't due to him, but the marriage therapy didn't go anywhere. But it turns out Kevin was an incredible sports psychologist. And so, I even worked with him when I was in Chicago, like via phone, or you remember back in the days when they had like the little mini cassettes,
Yeah.
He would literally talk into that and send one to me.
Nice.
And so, but I called him recently to see, and he goes, yeah, you didn't call me in 1994. So I honestly, I don't know who it was I spoke with.
Okay.
But I somehow, after the season was over, I was no longer depressed. And so you mentioned, okay, but you know what? After that 95 season, that's the best season I ever had in my life.
Right.
And after that season, I don't know at what point, I want to say maybe, well, probably not long, maybe February, March, I felt that depression again. And it wasn't just depression, it was like anxiety.
Yeah.
Like I was afraid to talk to people. I was afraid to make eye contact. I did not want to invite a conversation under any circumstances. And yet we had off-season workouts, and I'm like, how can this be happening? But that just showed me there's no correlation to what's going well or not well in your life.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think once football ended, I wasn't depressed. I wasn't, I had other things going on. My kids were young. They started getting into youth football, my oldest one. And I was running a little quarterback and receiver camp at the time. And I don't know how this happened, but somebody from Fox must have come and be sitting in this little classroom we had. And next thing you know, I get a phone call from Fox to come down and do some audition. And I'm like, audition for what? Like talking in front of whatever. And I swear I was horrible. I'm surprised they asked me back. But they did. And that back then, NFL Europe was going on and Fox broadcasted those things. And then Fox here in LA was kind of the central hub of Fox. And so I was doing college games, pro games, studio stuff. And coaching youth football. And it was a nice little time. But yeah, there's been other times in my life that haven't been so nice.
So Deidre and Nicole, from your time, especially with working with men, working with athletes, does that sound normal, as in, going through periods where that depression is there, kind of lifts, kind of comes back? Do you guys see that a lot?
I mean, I can speak with it from a veteran's point of view, and actually it's not just men, it's people in general.
Right.
And I'm a person that deals with it, and I work with a lot of people hand in hand that deal with it. So it's something that you have to constantly fight with and deal with. You never know what may bring it on. Something that Erik said, which is very true, is a lot of us are high functioning. We go on with our days and our work days like nothing is going on. You would never be able to look at the average person and say, oh, wow, this person has PTSD. This person has anxiety or is suffering from depression. So it's not something that you can point out or goes up and down or is special to an individual. So no, and I'm sure that Dr. Deidre can speak to it a little bit better, but from my perspective, I just don't think it's singled out by men or shows up differently in men. One thing I do notice in healthcare in general is that in some cases, men are not as quick to get the help that they need for the things that occur. They think that they can fix it on their own. So women tend to be more likely to go and get help quicker. So
I'll just start where you left off there. Certainly, even in the populations that I serve and have the pleasure of working with, college-age students or adults, there's certainly stigma across a lot of different populations about mental health, and men absolutely tend to seek help less readily than women. And so imagine being a high functioning athlete and male and seeking services. And so one of the things that I like to say is, how do we reach folks exactly where they are? And the best way to do that is to make mental health conversations accessible in every arena, rather than people having to come. One of the things I do is outreach and prevention in my role. And prevention is so important. Like, why not just have mental health a part of everyday conversations in your families or your workplaces or, in your locker rooms, and it doesn't have to sound all clinical. It could just be like, what's up? How are you doing? How are you managing today? And so making it okay to not be okay, like I'm struggling a bit, and making it okay to do that, I think is part of lifting that stigma to make it okay for folks to get help when they need it.
Yeah, it's great to see the current day times with the NFL having commercials, public service announcements about that, to see someone that you consider a strong, invincible man, right? The peak athletic thing, talking about their struggles is something that we did not have, back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
Erik, you want to talk a little bit about how you feel seeing those PSAs now versus kind of what the attitude was like in the 90s?
Well, okay, so here I will guarantee you this. Back when I was seeing then Dr. Wildenhouse, who's no longer a doctor, he worked for Johnson & Johnson in a similar role, but I will guarantee you back then, nobody on any team was seeing anybody. And so I think I don't know that's the same today. I have a feeling that's changing.
Yeah.
And I think I was actually surprised myself to find out that the NFL sort of jumped into this mental health world. But now every team has to have a licensed clinician on staff, and I think they have to be there like 12 to 15 hours a week or something.
That's perfect.
And well, it is and it isn't. So, and when I say it isn't, because this is something I'm leading up to and something I'm getting behind, is that by the time you get to that age, for an example, there's a friend of mine who I played college football with. He himself went on to play in the pros and had a very successful career. And today, of course, he's my age, and he's himself coaching and is an athletic director and a head high school football coach. And it was about a year ago that he started talking to me in ways that didn't sound like him and was telling me, I just don't feel like myself. Now, he'd lost his brother unexpectedly to cancer. He'd lost his mom. I don't know exactly when, but in the high school he was at wasn't quite what they build themselves to be. And so here he finds himself in this predicament for the first time in his life. And I reached out because I know the person with the Raiders, and this friend of mine's in Las Vegas. And I even had him talk to Kevin, and he had no problem talking to Kevin or anybody. But let's say there were 3 steps that you needed to make, or 4, right? He might make the first 2, but he's not stepping off that curb for number 3, which means number 4 either. Yep. And so this is what I mean. At that age, it would be great to have younger people, like kids even, start to, at a young age, start practicing some of this, get it out, or even learn how to be an effective, empathetic listener. And, I have some thoughts on that we can talk about. But anyway, not that the NFL is doing a bad job. It's just that it's surprisingly, in a good way, they're doing this. But at the current time, I don't know that they have any specified programs. Like, they're in support of whatever it is you're going through. They'll have somebody there to talk to if you like. But I think they're kind of in the midst of creating some programs themselves. So, like, for instance, the Hall of Fame, everybody associates the Hall of Fame with the Hall of Fame. Well, there's a Hall of Fame behavioral health that is just kind of cracking into the lineup right now, kind of trying to find themselves and where they should best sort of position themselves. So like I was saying, it's everywhere. It's in corporate America. It's in pro sports, all pro sports leagues now. And so I think it's sort of just really scratching the surface of what it can ultimately be, where who knows where that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they're doing it and are now actively like putting the shingle on the door saying we're in support of is a great first step. Because honestly, in the 90s, that would not have happened.
No.
Like here this year, who was it? Calvin Ridley stepped away.
Yep.
From
Absolutely.
the Falcons, right? He didn't say what his mental health issues were, but he just said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to deal with them.
Yeah.
And so that would have never happened before, ever.
No one ever teams would not allow that. Or they would make up a fake injury or something.
Well,
they wouldn't.
Well, even the person themselves wouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm. No,
there would not have been the open door to do that. And I remember after I was done playing, Kevin Wildenhouse and I we became friends over time, and he had thought to me, or he had openly expressed to me, hey, would you ever consider writing a book with me on this matter? And I was like, yeah, but you know what? I didn't. Mm-hmm. I didn't because I didn't want to draw that attention to myself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now I would. I've actually approached him about doing it. And
I would love to read that.
Well, thank you. And
we'll get on it. Come on.
Well, for Kevin, he's good. He's really good. But I'm just saying, I love the fact that at all levels, you mentioned Simone Biles before, so it's not just pro athletes. You're hearing now from college students, college athletes or non-athletes, high school kids now are finally starting to go, well, I'll jump on this too. It's great, in my opinion.
Yeah. I've spoken before about, and Deidre, I'll let you go after because this might touch in what you were going to say. I've been open about my struggles exiting the collegiate athletic world, of kind of that, who am I after being a track sprinter? I was a sprint, it was like middle school, high school. That was my identity. It was my goal, was to go D1. I did it. I had a decently successful career. Who am I? I also was not aware that I had untreated mental illness, that I was using track as my drug. That was the only thing that was keeping me going. So about a year and a little bit after college, I actually ended up in the psych ward of a hospital. I was not doing well at all. And it's, now I can speak on it openly. I went on a lot of medication. Let me tell you, I tried them all. And it's just come into part of who I am is I will be someone that will probably always be medicated. But now I have diagnosed mental illness and I see my psychiatrist every only year now. I don't go to my psychologist anymore. I went to her weekly for like 7 years. It was a long struggle for me. I know at Penn State, they had some classes and stuff that were like life after sports, but they were really focusing more on career. It was just this whole thing about what about those of us that were using this? I'm very high functioning. I got all A's. I had good job. Like everything was great, but I was not able to function without track. Track was my crack. but it was my drug. I was addicted to it, kind of like that.
Well, Nicole, I saw you unmute yourself. I just wanted to quickly say I was getting chills here because I just really appreciate, Sherry, you and Erik willing to share your own stories. I mean, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and I have anxiety. I have my own therapist. And I just think the more that people like you that have credence in a lot of arenas openly talk about it, it makes it easier for others to be vulnerable and share. And then you can have the community of support you need to manage through. So thank you.
That was very similar to what I was going to say. it's very easy for others to join something that you're supporting when you yourself are a member. I have theater for therapy. I'm always a part of the act. This is something that I do myself. I enjoy it. I call myself the star of the show. So it's not hard for people to join and understand that this is a part of life. What I like to tell people, when Sherry and I touched on this when we met, is it's easy for people to take medication for diabetes or for high blood pressure
Right.
or for other things that are common in the community. But when you tell them that you take medication for anxiety or depression, you get a different raised eyebrow for that.
Mhm.
But what I'm excited about is it is becoming more of a regular topic. What I've noticed on job applications is they actually have added that to job applications. Do you suffer from diabetes? Do you suffer from depression, anxiety? These are things that they recognize as a part of disability.
Yeah.
And they acknowledge it, and they also include that they will not discriminate against you if you suffer from any of these illnesses. So it's making mental health more inclusive instead of something that's exclusive or giving people raised eyebrows about. And I'm very open most of the time, depending on the setting. Sometimes it's just not appropriate to start talking, having this conversation. However, it's not something that I hide. The reason that Where We Meet was developed was because I felt like we should, exactly what was said, meet people where they are and try to help support them and get them where they need to go. So again, I'm with you, Deidre, Dr. Deidre. I'm so excited to be here. This is a pleasant surprise, Sherry. Please, let's keep in touch. I'm not closing the show out, but
I was gonna say,
I'm
no,
just
we're not.
a
We're just getting started.
bit emotional and just trying to kind of chime in while I have this couple of minutes and just
Absolutely.
tell you how thankful I am to be a part of the panel.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you touched on that part about the disability aspect, because there are mental disorders that are covered by the ADA. Mine is one of them. And so I made sure for my current job, underneath that disability section for the HR portal, where it's like, do you have a disability? You don't say which one, but yes, I do, because I know it protects me. If, in case I ever do go off the deep end and spiral out of control again, which hopefully that will never happen because I have the controls in place, but you do have that protection to protect your job and your livelihood. And when he talked about the medication thing, a couple of years ago, my doctor, he was like, do you want to try to go off your meds? And I was like, okay. I did the slowest taper ever. And oh my God, after like a week, I was like, I can't. And I was like, is this withdrawal? What is this? And he was like, no, that's actually just kind of your baseline. That is who you are. And I was like, no, we are not going back there. I was cleaning things at like 1 a.m, just I was like, oh my God, how did I manage like this? Give me my drugs. But yeah, if I was a diabetic, or if I had high cholesterol or high blood pressure, no one would be like, oh, have you tried going off your meds? I mean, he asked me if I wanted to, because some people do. But yeah, it was never like a question of, do you want to stop taking that pill now? I'm like, no.
Yep.
And I'm curious, I know that sometimes just to normalize like treatment or what you do, there's certainly medication, there's talk therapy. I think, Erik, you alluded to before, just finding someone to talk to. Some folks use healthy relationships with exercise or nutrition and all those. I know I'm always curious to hear folks' stories about what is uniquely helpful for you too, as you walk your everyday life and wellness and what helps.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking me, what's always helped is eventually. So the consistency of talking to somebody, and it could be a therapist, it could be a friend, it could be whoever has your best interest and is a good listener and has some sort of, like very insightful perspective on just listening. And then, hey, have you thought about thinking of that in this way? Maybe they didn't think. Maybe they weren't thinking what you thought they were thinking. And so, and then I myself, you guys, have taken anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants. And I found nothing but good positive results with that. And there's been now I'm on no medication now, but there's been times as I think back where the only reason that I could come up with to get off of them is just feeling sort of flattened out. And so I other than that, no, I've had no bad. I've not had one bad experience, never. And so, yeah, I think like you were asking, Deidre, I just think having your own somewhat, I guess you could call it a support system, people that allow you that, and there's nothing that says you can't be part of someone else's,
Right.
and it allows you to, whatever it is, get it out and get it out in a way to people that feel safe for you and that build you up instead of allowing you to isolate yourself, because the world has enough people that they'll oblige you if you want to do that. But it's the rare few that do that. Like kids, especially, everybody's against you. No, they're not. One person. And so learning how to build your own sort of support network at whatever age that occurs doesn't matter.
That's good. Thank you.
And for me, Dr. Deidre, did I interrupt someone?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'm so excited about this question because I have a long list. But I started off with just prayer because, I grew up in church and everything was prayer. But now I actually meditate, I journal, I do theater, I exercise very little. But I do have conversations with friends and family and my support system. What I like most is the journaling and meditating. I take emergency medication when things get really tough. And then I have my regular regimen. So yes, I just rotate those things like a Ferris wheel. That's what I do. I'm very excited about that. And that's what I push the most, is having that toolbox and the support system, because I think together those things will take us a long way.
I love it.
I would say two things helped me turn the corner most. One was starting to volunteer. So it's to this day, I still volunteer pretty much weekly. I've done some different organizations. I did Anti-Cruelty Society. I did Crisis Text Line. I did Cards for Kids. Now I do Lakeview Pantry. But I'm always looking to give back. And then other one was adopting my pets. When I got my dog, it was the last night I ever took Ambien was the night before I got my dog. And I just went cold turkey, never did it again. And then I got my cat and my world went crazy. But nothing brings me joy, I guess, like taking care of others and taking care of animals. So I did want to.
Can I jump in and say something to back you up on that, Sherry? Is that one time I remember calling Kevin, and it was in a time when I was feeling fairly low, and he didn't word it just like this, but it was to the effect of, "What did you do for someone else today?"
Yeah. It's definitely it's almost a selfish thing to do, right? Is to volunteer. So I did want to kind of pivot a little bit. We've talked about our sports careers. We've talked about the garden variety, mental health, but the big topic is grief. And Erik, you have gone through grief that I don't think any person, any parent would ever want to go through. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. So I mentioned my kids earlier. So I got two sons, Griffin and Dylan, and they were about 5 years apart, like 2 weeks shy of 5 years apart. And Griffin, beautiful kid, and but early on, he had, like, I think back to like his second grade, and just learning how to read was very difficult. And sitting in class was impossible. And he had a teacher, I think this is a third grade, different school, and so he had these sort of learning challenges throughout, and not just in school, but it was friends of his, and he couldn't understand why the very friends over here weren't calling him over here. And he didn't understand that he was sabotaging his own relationships. And so eventually, Griffin around between his 8th and 9th grade year, my wife and I at that time were seeing a therapist together. And the topic of Griffin started coming up more and more. And so he asked, would it be okay if he spoke with Griffin a little bit? And of course. And so eventually he asked if it was okay, would it be okay if you had a neuropsychologist evaluate him? Mm-hmm. And sure, it was about 3 or 4 day process. And what came back was that Janine Beisman's her name, and it was heartbreaking because his I guess it's your frontal cortex, mm-hmm. Like it had some executive functioning issues that I don't care how long he went to school, it wasn't going to work. Okay. School and him were not going to ever fit. And so I tried this homeward bound Second Nature place it was a camp in Utah, a wilderness camp. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I at that time were all but separated, only living in the same house. Mm-hmm. And my younger son, Dylan, at that time was about, I'd say he was probably 8. And so we go out to see Griffin, and here's the issue. We flew separately. We rented separate cars. We go to visit him. And she decided to bring him home. Mm. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I'm driving home by myself and eventually the airport home. And I call back the therapist who we had been seeing. Mm-hmm. And he said, there's a company called Homeward Bound that helps with their transition home. Try them. Mm-hmm. Well, what they turned out to be was not a transition home. They were like a family systems communication program in-house. Best thing I've ever been a part of. It was 3 days. And at the end of it, it's about how you talk and listen and rules and blah, blah, blah. Great presentation and awesome. And at the end of it, they said, okay, now would be a good time to have this home team. You call family, friends, Griffin calls family, friends, and have them come over. And what happened was, here they came, and Griffin got to stand up and speak about, hey, over these last few days, this is what my life has now become and what I'd like to see continue. Could you all support me in that effort? Of course, and then little things, call me up and take me to lunch or whatever. And so that Homeward Bound is still in existence. And unfortunately for Griffin, though, it didn't get him over that hump. Mm-hmm. And so he, about a year and a half later, I'll speed this up. He ended up getting my wife said he's got a drug problem. And she arranged with her friends that he go to this inpatient program, which I wasn't against. It kind of hit me like a wave. And it was a great experience where he went to a place called Visions. And then they had an outpatient program that lasted about a year. And the unfortunate part for Griffin is that I could sort of hear in his voice as it kind of got within a month or two, his thinking had shifted. Hmm. And then, so this was like in January or so of 2011. And he ended up going back to real school and playing football. And so during his last season, they had played a game and I picked him up and I was dropping him off at Marshawn's house. And it was the first time in his life he had talked to me about hey, do you think Coach Fenwick would allow me to come out for football at Pierce College? Well, this was Valley College now.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, sure. And we sat outside of Marshawn's house for at least an hour, just gabbing away.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was a Friday night. And then I get a call on Sunday morning from the Lost Hills Sheriff's Department.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't tell me why they wanted me to come down to the station. And so I drove down, and I can't remember what my mindset was at the time, but it couldn't have been good. And so as I'm walking up the steps, this officer meets me outside and told me that Griffin had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was from a heroin overdose. And yeah, that was a bit of a, I don't even know what to call it, but it was a feeling like I'd never had before. It was sadness. It wasn't depression. It was sadness like I'd never known. And later it was at a house. He'd gone to a house. And I won't get into the whole story of that, but eventually I got to see him, and that's the at that time, that's the only dead body I'd ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like 10 minutes wasn't going to change it. 10 years wasn't going to change it. And he's always 18 years old now. And it was, for everybody, devastating. I remember Dylan was sleeping over a friend's house that night. And the friend I knew and was friends with his dad. And so I called him up, Dave, and I said, hey, I'm not going to get into it, but here's what happened. Would you mind hanging on to Dylan for a little bit until I can get home? And so he eventually, he said, of course. And eventually he came in and dropped Griffin off. He had his son with him, and he left. And I literally told Dylan right as I was sitting in that chair, and he was in the other one. And you talk about a kid who just, I mean, I don't even know how to describe what, because I wasn't in his body and in his head, but it was, what came out of his mouth was horrific. And so those were not good times. And it took quite a while to kind of even get my bearings, give Dylan his bearings, and everybody, like there was his service, there must have been 5,000 people there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know who half of them were. And there were, some of them were people I went to high school with, but I didn't even know who was there. And it just made me think, I mean, he didn't commit suicide, but it made me think that, you think you're alone, and yet look who showed up. And I mean, they came from everywhere, inside the state, outside the state. And yeah, that was a tough time. And then not long, my mom, as I had mentioned earlier, about a year before, on Mother's Day, the day after Mother's Day, in fact, she found she had stage 4 uterine cancer. And so that in itself was, I don't even know what the word I can say about that is, but then she made it through this horrific surgery, and then chemo followed that, and she would always stay in the hospital for chemo, and I would stay with her, several times. And like, it's not like they roll out a king bed for you, they got a fold out chair of some kind. And but then eventually she passed away that next July after Dylan. And so, yeah. And then my dad, he had some untreated untreated acid reflux
Okay.
that turned into esophageal cancer. So that became like a long, slow. I hope this doesn't sound too insensitive, but it's like a long, slow death march.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the wheels were coming off fast. And that led to, like, I don't know if any of you have experienced this. Well, Sherry, you alluded to a little bit earlier, but having had depression before, I felt this little sucker creep up. And when it's there, it doesn't like, oh, here 1 minute, gone the next. I was like, oh no. And so I I had a friend who was over one day, and I told her what I was thinking. And unbeknownst to me, she called the suicide hotline. And so I spent some time talking with that guy, very nice guy. But ultimately, I called this friend of mine who was another former Lions quarterback, Erik Hipple. And unbeknownst to me, Erik had helped start a depression center out in Michigan. And so he's like, hey, Erik, jump on a plane, come out here. And I did. The unfortunate part for me was that A, I probably waited too long, and B, prior to going, I had already purchased a gun. And I guess there's laws that you can't take it when you buy it. And so here I am in this gun store trying to act like, oh, I do this all the time. If they could only see what I was thinking. And so I end up going back to Chelsea, Michigan, I guess is where it was. And so after about 2 days, I called up Erik and I said, I just don't think this is the right place for me. Well, it was exactly the right place for me. But I think I was too far gone. And so I don't know. I don't even remember how I got home. I think I stayed for 30 days. And I don't know who picked me up. I don't know anything. All I know is that I, at some point, began preparing my exit. And in fact, I shouldn't be here right now. So fortunately, most times in life, I'm a good shot. But in that particular case, I wasn't, fortunately. And
You were a very bad shot.
Yeah.
And you also sent a very important text message, or was it a phone call right before?
No, it was I guess, I don't remember it, but apparently I sent several. And one in particular was to a friend of mine who I went to high school with, who was actually worked at Lost Hill Sheriff Station. And apparently he was in and out of the state somewhere helping his son get moved in. And I think it was in Louisiana or something. And so apparently I told him where I was and what I was about to do. And so he called over to Lost Hills and then called my room. And I guess I answered. And he said, okay, whatever is in your hand, if there's anything in your hand, drop it. And then he said, there's some people at the door waiting for you. And I guess I got up and walked to the door. And I guess I walked into the ambulance. So, yeah, it was, like I said, I shouldn't be here, but I am here. And so every day my feet hit the floor in the morning, like there's no such thing as a bad day.
Yes.
I my dog is very distressed next to me. That's why dogs are great. She can
Yeah.
sense when I'm crying or about to cry, and she can sense that I'm upset right now. So she's like, I am here as your therapy dog.
Mhm.
Mm.
I was just gonna say what incredible vulnerability for the intense grief and loss that you've experienced, and thank you for sharing. And I don't think, I mean, those experiences are unique to you. I know all of us are at some point touched by grief. And,
Right.
I was part of a caretaking team for my father, and he had dementia for quite a while. And
Mm.
just that process and watching that, and he passed in 2021. And I'm a spiritual person, so I believe that he's absent from his body, but his spirit lives on in all of us. And I appreciate, um, thank you for sharing. And the one thing I'll say in this during these times is, sometimes we get caught up in living our everyday lives and forget how many of us have been touched by grief over the years, and certainly now, with COVID, the pandemic happening, and the many lives, like a million, right, that have been lost. And
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate having this discussion. And I think we can all Google the cycles of grief and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
what I know, as having gone through grief personally and also as a therapist, is that everyone's process is different and unique. And so
Yeah.
anytime that we can help someone walk their own journey of healing in their unique way is going to be helpful, and not expect anyone to look a certain way or behave a certain way in their own grief process. So I
Right.
appreciate
Right.
you being so open. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. I appreciate that. And I think the other thing too is I've obviously that was back, that was several years ago. And I've obviously, there's other people that come in your path that they themselves have experienced things. And I think it's important for people to know that there's no timetable.
Right.
There's no timetable, and your timetable might be sort of like okay today, but thinking you're okay. But then tomorrow you're not okay.
Mhm.
And that all fits too, you know?
One thing, Eric, that when you're speaking, it reminds me of my time with the crisis text line. Is we went through, Deidre and Nicole, you're probably familiar with this, the 4 stages or those 4 questions for that suicide kind of, is this person a high risk? And, 1 is, are you having the thoughts of suicide? 2, have you decided how you're going to do it? 3, do you have access to the item? And 4, do you have a timeline for it? And so when I was doing my crisis counseling, I never really got past stage 2. Like, people would talk about it. Actually, 3. Sometimes it was 3, but they wouldn't have that timeline. And it's when someone says, "I'm going to do it X," like you said, Eric, you're planning your exit. When people have that full plan, that's when we would have called in and called for those medical thing. But it's challenging to talk about suicide. I think my training definitely helped me be able to talk about it in more of a not freak out type way. One of my best friends, he tried to commit suicide, I want to say maybe 2 years ago ish, year and a half and 2 years ago. A hard time to go through, but it's been a difficult journey for him since. But it's one of those things where he knows that he can talk to me about it, because he knows I start to do the suicide assessment on him. And when he starts to say, I'm thinking I don't want to be here, this and that, I don't freak out. You know what I mean? It's like, I want him to feel comfortable to talk about that, but then he knows I'm going to go through the steps.
Well, I think, Sherry, you mentioned earlier, I think it was you that talked about, you get good at hiding things.
I was
And
fantastic at it. Mm-hmm.
literally 2 days before I shot myself, I was over at a friend's house with the coach that we both played for in junior college. And he's like, "Eric, you told me that he goes, they knew I had been struggling earlier. And so Dave asked me, he goes, how did you do it? I go, well, how do you eat an elephant?
Mm.
And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, one bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
Yeah.
And so here I'm saying that, and 2 days later I did what I did.
Yeah.
So, and as I look back, I was huddled up by myself in my house for a good solid 3 or 4 weeks doing this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the last day that I had everything planned out and there was nothing more to plan. I was standing at the top of the stairs going, I just had this edgy feeling, okay, now there's nothing left to do. And so, other than that, and so I had to go literally drive somewhere to go do this.
Right.
And
So you went to a hotel, correct?
mm-hmm, yep. Ironically, the Good Night Inn.
Okay.
Now, Deidre, I know I held you hostage a few
No,
minutes
it's
past
fine.
when you needed to.
Mhm.
But thank you so much for jumping with. We're gonna keep talking.
Okay.
But I really do appreciate your time. I appreciate you being on here, and I know that whenever I do need to get a mental health professional in here, you will be my first call.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure meeting and talking with all of you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Take
Thank
care.
you. You too.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And then there were 3. I know, Nicole, you've
3
been quiet
amigos.
for a few
I know.
minutes. I know you're processing.
I am, and the thing is, my family is going through similar circumstances right now. So I'm definitely going to share this podcast with them. As I stated earlier on, we've lost 3 relatives in 3 months, 2 within the last couple of weeks. And one of my cousins, actually 2 of my cousins, actually 4 of my cousins were in a tragic accident, and we lost one of them on the scene. So while I was really kind of in a daze while Erik was talking, because I was just thinking about how quickly grief can affect someone's life.
Yep.
It's something that's unexpected, and it's something you have to deal with as soon as it happens. So as you can't plan for it, but you have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate you sharing your story. And as I stated, I'm going to share it with others because it's very useful. And here's another tool that we can use, sharing information that others have shared as support. And I know the organization that I founded, we're actually having, similar to what you're saying, Sherry, is a class. It's called QPR, but it teaches people how to respond when they know that others are attempting suicide. So it's similar to CPR, but it's actually guided towards suicide. So that's a good segue. Well, that's a good lead. This conversation is a good lead into that class. So I'm actually going to share this with that team and group as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's challenging, right? When you're speaking with somebody. And for me, it was over text. I didn't hear the voice, but one person that, I don't want to say I became numb to it, but every week talking to people for a couple hours, and most of them were going through depression. There was a lot of suicidal thoughts. It affects me, but I guess I learned, like you said, that toolbox of how to separate my life from that. But there were a few people that did. I remember one person's conversation. I went through my thing of all right, have you thought about this? What do you want to do? And they're like, well, I want to jump off of like a building or a bridge. And it's like, all right, well, so okay, do you have it planned? And they were like, I'm on my roof. Well, how high is your roof? 2 stories. And I'm thinking, well, you probably won't die if you jump on. And I'm like, God, I hate how my mind just went to there. But, I had to say, could you get off your roof for a minute so we can keep talking? Because you have to ask them if they have the thing, can you just step away from it? But there was that little part of me going through the assessment. I was like, all right, so 2 floors probably won't do it. And so I think I'm good. And I'm like, man, how is my life turned into this, you know?
Yeah, you probably saved him a broken leg for sure.
For sure.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing is, you don't know what could happen. At the end of the day, they could hurt themselves by mistake, you know, hit the wrong place on their head. And then either way, it's a challenging position to be in, to try to save someone from doing something so traumatic. And it's actually traumatic itself to be the person on the other end of the phone. So kudos to you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sherry, you know, I've spoken, this is back years ago, actually when I was still in recovery. I was talking to the coach that I had played for had switched schools, junior colleges. And so he was now at the crosstown school. And so I'd asked him, hey, would you mind would you mind gathering up some folks that I could come speak with? And so there was must have been, I don't know, 300 or so people. There were some faculty there. There were some students there. And at the end, after I'm telling my story, and after any questions, the best thing about that is getting to talk to people and have them come up and tell you their story. And one woman, she goes, you know, my brother, he either attempted to, I can't remember, he either attempted to take his life or he did. Mm-hmm. And she became a suicide hotline counselor. Mm-hmm. Right. Wow. But there was like, I've talked at I went to 2 high schools. I spoke at one of them, and just what happens afterward is, it could be a mom, a dad, a kid, it doesn't matter. Like, they're going to share something with you. Mm-hmm. And sitting in my chair or being on my end, that's makes it all worth it. You know?
Yeah, and it's definitely, you want to avoid, so for me, I've actually never spoken about this in podcasts before, but I had PTSD when I was 13 years old. I was kidnapped at gunpoint and raped. So not something people usually go through, but I did survive. And obviously didn't do very well with the PTSD standpoint from it. But one thing that I really try to discourage women when they talk about their own sexual assault is, we're not doing the trauma Olympics here. You know, cats in the background wanting to play. But it's very important. Like, I never want people to be like, oh, your sexual assault was worse than mine. I shouldn't feel bad because mine was only date rape or only this. And same with like grief, right? It was like, well, you lost a child, but you know, I did. And it's like listening to those stories. It's like, I always try to, you get there. And I definitely felt like an outsider for sexual assault survivors, because most people that went through what I did aren't alive anymore. You know, it's usually the stranger ones aren't living, right? It's mostly people that you know. And I've talked to some women, and it's like, you know, you have a completely different thing that you go through, right? Mine is more that anxiety of the stranger danger, the this and that. Yours is people that you thought you trusted, and it's a completely different type of trauma. So don't you go around saying that, you know, it's not as bad or it's easy to go through.
I agree with that, Sherry. And I'm a victim similar to your circumstances of sexual assault. And I am also a witness to people comparing their tragedies or their trauma. The thing about tragedies and trauma is the way people respond is so much different. Some people are built differently, and how they respond to this trauma and tragedy is different. And some people don't utilize any systems. They try to keep it all inside, which is what I did for decades, actually. And when it comes out, it can come out in so many ways, and physically, mentally. And so, yes, comparison kills. No pun intended. But there are tools and resources for everyone at their levels of grief, tragedy, and trauma. So yeah, agreed.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Yeah, it's definitely we avoid the trauma Olympics as much as I can. Nicole, did you need to head out now as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump off. I have a couple other things that I need to
Of
do
course.
and an early start in the morning. But this has been awesome. And I could go on and on. And I would like to come back and definitely have a offline conversation with you, Mr. Erik. This has been very good. I could use you as a resource and tool if it's okay with you.
I'm available.
Yeah, you can help a lot of people. So Sherry, thank you. I don't even know how many times to thank you for this. It's really big for me.
We'll be in touch because I am so excited about what you're doing in your organization because it is definitely needed. So Nicole, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you both. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you. You too, Nicole.
And then there were two.
It's like the war of attrition.
Absolutely. So for God, and again, right, we're talking trauma Olympics. I'm not going to do it. I'm like, oh God, you've been to absolute hell and back. Your life is where I won't do it. But we talked a little bit about your tools and your tool kit. But what would you say for someone going through a lot of grief right now? Maybe someone just lost a family member. What advice would you give them? What would you share for them, and what they should do?
Well, like the two ladies were saying before, everybody's situation is different. What I would say is do not isolate yourself. Don't self-impose that on you. It's not everybody's knee-jerk reaction when they're going through grief to, oh, let me just broadcast this out to the world. No one's asking you to do that. Just hopefully along the course in life, you've found some people that you can share things with from time to time that maybe you can't with others. And so find those people, reach out to them. Do not think, oh, I can figure this out. You can't. There's no such thing as figuring it out. It's just, it takes a little release valve from time to time. It takes a change of perspective. It takes going to lunch. It takes a view over a cliff, and not the kind you jump off of, but just keep living. But just reach on, lean on the people that you can lean on. And because you're actually, some people think, oh, I don't want to burden you. The person that you think you're burdened is not burdened. People love to be helpful or in some way contribute to what's good for you, because what's good for you is good for them too.
That's a great point. When I was talking to my buddy that I was saying had attempted suicide, and it was months after, and he was kind of talking about, oh, well, if I had been successful, this or that. And I was like, yeah, if you had, I don't know if I would have recovered from it yet. And he was like, oh, right. That is kind of thinking of, he's not a burden to me. I mean, sometimes he might get on my nerves, but he was not a burden to me. He was someone who, if he was no longer with us, I would have been in intense grief over, and I would have been second guessing a lot of things.
Well, think about this for a second. Had I been successful, Dylan would have been without a dad. And so, there was some time where I could, in a way, not feel him pulling away from me, but being tired of me talking to him in a way. And I remember my aunt saying, Erik, she goes, you know what Dylan needs? He needs to know that tomorrow and the next day and the next day, he's going to wake up and you're going to be there. That's it. And it's like, that's so true. And there's nothing to fix. just be there. And that's helped. And I think just she's so right. I mean, it's not that Dylan and I ever had a bad relationship. We didn't. A great one.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that, I can't say I feel guilt, because that would mean that I was in my right mind at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But so now I just feel like whatever Dylan is into, and he's in baseball and he's in college and he's got the same girlfriend he's had for, I think, like 3 or 4 years since he was a junior in high school, and she's awesome too. So if he's happy, I'm happy.
Absolutely.
And this is probably the longest stretch in his life. He's 23. This is probably the longest stretch in his life where nothing tragic has happened.
Wow.
And so it's like, for him, he's playing baseball.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing well in school. He's got good friends. And it's like, okay, I'm going to stay out of the way of that. And he's doing just fine. And I think that's, partly one of the things that is it okay to talk about this little program that I had in mind to talk about?
Oh my God, please do. Yes.
So about, so I had mentioned to you earlier about this friend of mine, mm-hmm. who, again, my age, and he's experiencing this for the first time, this sort of uneasy feeling about his own life. And so that got me thinking about, hey, wonder if somebody approach me about suicide prevention, mm-hmm. and taking that to the NFL. And I ran this by Kevin. He goes, NFL is not going to want to talk about that. And so that got me thinking about this school age program, about kind of based on Homeward Bound. So, mm-hmm. kind of getting kids at like 4th and 5th grade, and starting to help them identify certain characteristics, whether they be in themselves or in others, mm-hmm. that are sort of admirable qualities, like being a good listener, or having someone's back, or in some way not just telling the truth, but that too. Whatever good things are, identify those, and then start to, I think it was, what was the last woman's name that was on? Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
How she was talking about she's involved with theater therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So there was another woman who's involved now with this program as I'm trying to create it and help create it. She has a background in theater, in improv, actually, mm-hmm. in social change theater. And the way I met her was after Griffin had passed away. It was sometime afterward. And have you ever heard of reality parties?
No,
if you
I haven't.
haven't, it's okay. Mm-hmm. So I hadn't either. And so what they are is a theater enactment, social change theater, of different scenes in a house that are sort of replicas of what happens at a high school party.
Okay.
And so very eye-opening because it's for parents to come to. And so you do that, and I forget how long the little house tour takes, but let's say it takes a half hour. Then they had in the garage set up some young therapists that are kind of yet to kind of launch out on their own just yet. They had some law enforcement guys, and kind of started this little parent sort of, oh my God, I can't believe what I just saw. That really happens? Yeah, it happens at the party your kids just threw when you went out the other night. Or when you were upstairs last night, they were having mm-hmm. a party downstairs that you apparently didn't know about. And so Catherine has taken that, and she actually, her outfit now is called Bright, or Bright World. And so they go on to not high school, but like elementary and middle school campuses. I think maybe in high schools too. and most of their funding comes from drug and alcohol prevention.
Okay.
But they have a very interactive website, and they tackle all the issues. It's just they're more directed in that vein. And
You want
so,
to type that in the comments so I can put it in the broadcast
me?
that out for people? Yeah, you put it in our private chat, and I'll
Okay.
broadcast that out.
So put Bright World.
Yeah, the website you were talking about.
Okay, so this is what, and so it's a nonprofit.
I love making people type when they're on screen under pressure.
No pressure. Okay, so there we go. And
all right, T, can you put that out? Another one? Thank you.
And so, so anyway, we're working on this together. And one of the things is to eventually get kids to begin identifying in others who they would like to have on their own home team or support group.
Okay.
And so acting some of those scenes out that Catherine's group can do, whether it be on campus type of scenarios, in home type of scenarios, or on a team, in a club, whatever. And then as you grow up through life and on through school, that becomes who you are. So that when you become 20, 30, 40, 50, this is who you are when it comes to challenges in life. And I'm wanting to reach out to the NFL and eventually all pro sports leagues in terms, so the NFL has what's called a rookie symposium.
Right.
And it's a year long. So they didn't have that when I was playing, but apparently it's a season long thing. So it's like, because every game's not played on Sunday, the normal player's day off is Tuesday when it is a Sunday. And so maybe there's 13 or 14 of those. Well, all these rookies or even first and second year players will attend this rookie symposium for, say, an hour or two, and there'll be sort of like main topics that need to be covered. And then on occasion, there'll be sort of like in school, an elective, right? And so one of the things I'm thinking about is approaching whoever runs, say for the Rams here, whoever runs their rookie symposium, and saying, hey, here's what we're doing with young kids over at so-and-so elementary. Do you think you could loan us player X to come and talk about his experience at that age to these school kids? And then my thought is there's also plenty of veteran players around that no longer play that could probably serve as mentors to some young players. And so that's sort of this mental health mentorship program idea. And I'm also thinking that, what community relations department with the Rams or any other sports league team wouldn't want to donate to that, to their own community? And then if you could draw in commitments from school districts, awesome. So anyway, that's sort of something that is kind of getting far down the tracks now. So I'm excited about that.
One player that comes to mind listening to you talk about that is Darren Waller, tight end for the Raiders, who has been very open about his substance abuse struggles in the past. And it is the stuff that he's been doing with the homeless population in Vegas, all these things. And like you said, in the 90s, you wouldn't have heard this big, strong, young, superstar guy talking about, I had a drug addiction. I believe it was opioids for him.
Well, I think that's
CJ. Yes, thank you. CJ Scott runs another podcast on our network, and appreciate you, my friends. It is, Well,
I think people like Darren and others, Dak Prescott having lost a brother,
Yeah.
and others. Everyone's got their stories, and the fact that there is a sort of an opportunity here to use some of your own life experiences to help other people. Who knows what that'll end up growing into at some point? But why not start to build sort of a train to put on that track?
Absolutely. Well, this might be, look, I have fun every time I'm on the show. You might be the only one that made me legit start to cry and laugh. But we're going to close this out.
It was a good outlet for me.
Oh
too.
my God. When I was like, those tears are about to come, my dog got off. She was like, uh-oh, this woman's gonna explode. And the thing is too, I knew the story. I knew it was coming, but I was like, uh-oh. Any final closing thoughts for us?
Well, you too. I'm not wearing a hat right now, but if I had one, I'd tip it. And that for what you shared, the people that listen to this podcast, one thing that this little social media world that I know nothing about, there's a story that goes with my story beyond this. And do you know the name Adam Schefter?
I don't think so.
So Adam Schefter is with, I think he's with ESPN. He's kind of like the NFL insider.
Okay, I would probably recognize him and recognize his voice.
Okay. Well, so a story was written on me by a guy named Tyler Dunn. And it was like a 3-piece article. I forget when it was. It was a couple years ago, maybe a year ago. And Adam Schefter, amongst others, retweeted it out. Adam Schefter's got like 10 or 12 million followers. But it was some guy, also David Axelrod. Do you know that name? He's a political guy that I don't really know who he is.
Yeah, these faces I'd probably recognize.
I've heard the name, but people they hear a good story and they retweet it to the world. And so what you're doing, I think, is, people respond to that. And it's your story and other people's stories. They're all worth telling because they all help us tell them. It's helpful to tell them, and it's helpful for the receiver hearing it.
Absolutely.
Because you don't know what they're going through. You have no idea.
No.
And so anyway, that's my one thing that I would say is
Fantastic.
that I think this is a great show because of what you've created.
I appreciate it. So usually I don't get that emotional in there, but the whole premise is interviewing badass women, sports world and beyond. And like you said, everyone has a story, and I can interview friends of mine from 15 years and I learned something new. It's all of us athletes have something that happened. And that's my sister, that comment. My sister is a teacher. Such a powerful show, such important topics. Thanks for using your story to help kids and others. It's true. And it's really, and part of the reason, Sherry, why do you create your show? If the content that you want isn't there, create it. And the thing that I love to do is learning about people's stories, mostly women, but look, come on, you play for the Lions. I can listen to yours.
Right. Right. I get the niche you have with women, but why not both? You're eliminating half of your potential audience.
Fair. No, I have some guys coming in. I actually have a guy coming in 2 weeks. He's going to be talking about his older sister that passed away, but his older sister was a phenomenal Olympian. And I'm not going to throw rocks at all the boys. Don't worry. You guys are welcome to hear. All right. So that is okay. So you're my co-host right now. So Erik, who would you like to give a shout out to before we wrap this up?
Well, let me start by saying hi to Dylan, my son. So he now lives down in Laguna Niguel. He goes to Westcliff University. And then I'd say my girlfriend Anna, she's a whole story to herself. She's the one that helped me in ways that I don't even know what she did in my brain recovery. And I've heard some from her. I've heard more from what others have told me what she did. And so I'd like to give a shout out to Anna, but I do that anyway. And just all the people like my aunt and buddy of mine, Espo, and even the guy, Ryan Wetnight, who with the Bears was a teammate of mine. He recently passed away just a little over a year ago, again, from esophageal cancer. And here's a guy who was cancer-free, had it once, cancer-free, and then went back in for some routine test, got it again, only now it was non-operable. But Ryan showed up at the brain clinic that I was living at, actually. And so, I don't know, just all the people that have been involved in my life from day one, really. And I'm just grateful for everybody that's had a hand in my life in one way or another. And especially these last several years, which have been, I've honestly, there's about 3 years in there where I don't have a recollection of any kind.
Wow.
And it's amazing that I can remember what I can, though, that goes either beyond that or after that. And so just everybody who was involved, like, you have no idea this recovery thing. I mean, it was insane. Yeah. Like this forehead here is not mine.
Wow.
And there was a time when I didn't have one. And I remember, now this is after I got this back, but I remember talking to one of the doctors. In fact, Anna took me to this doctor, and there was actually 2 doctors in the room. And I remember looking up at him after I'm talking about something, and then I look up and I'm like, did I say something wrong? And he's like, no, sorry if my jaw was on the ground. But like, people who were in your situation, they're not here talking. And so anyway, just like the doctors, there's doctors that operate on me, I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to talk to one of them the other day, and I said, you probably don't get this from someone who tried to commit suicide, but thank you. And so he's like, yeah, no, that's what I do. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, you might think I didn't want to be here, but I do. And so just there were so many people involved in that, not just the surgeons, but I don't know, just I'm just happy to be here.
You're gonna make me cry again. All right, well, I'll finish it out with my shout outs. Oh, shout out to everyone with my podcast network, T-Nick, JB, CJ. I saw you guys in the comments. AB, I know if you're not watching now, you'll be watching later. Tanya, everyone. And shout out to my co-host, Labyrinthia. I really, you and your family are in my thoughts. It's just, it's a hard time to lose a sibling. As you guys saw, my sister popped up a few times. My sister's my best friend. I don't know what I would do if I were to lose my sibling, and it would be a part of grief that I would never, I don't want to imagine. Randy saying, thank you for sharing your story, Erik. This is, oh man, you are a legend in the Detroit Lions world, but I think you are even more of a legend for what you have done off the football field. And I think you are going to become a legend for what you are going to be doing moving forward with the young children, even with football players. I think you're going to end up saving some lives. And it is saving them, inspiring them, making everyone's day a little bit better. So on that note, thank you for tuning in to the She Said What She Said podcast. Have a good night.
This has been a Chicago Clubhouse Network production. We out!
By the way, Do you have any She Said What She Said t-shirts?
Tina could get some. Yeah.
You have some though, right?
I have some.
You have
Yeah.
swag that's the
I
She Said What She Said swag?
I got the koozie. Yeah.
So I was thinking that was like, I don't know, Kahlua Drambuie or something. No,
it's there. Are we still live? We are still alive. Randy, one of my all-time favorite people.
I don't want to get you in trouble here with your sponsor people.
No, that's fine. No, yeah, we have the swag. We can get you some.